So, Dr. Veith, we've been talking about the apostasy and hypocrisy in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, particularly within the leadership, although it's not restricted to that group. I wanted to ask, should we be surprised by this phenomenon in our worldwide church?
No, because it's prophetic and it's historic. I don't think we should be surprised, but we should lament it. We should be saddened by it. But my own personal experience, even if I come to areas where I believe it's particularly bad, I always find a shining light here and there at every level. So God has not forsaken his church, and there are 7,000 that have not bowed the knee. And they're spread all over the place. So God has his people.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So if it's fulfillment of prophecy, although we may lament this atrocious condition of the church, we should still seek some peace in the reality that is taking us closer to Jesus' advent.
I think we are on the very threshold of the final events. And I think the shaking will come soon, and then the latter rain will fall. Mm-hmm. We might have a spattering or a drop here, but we won't have an outpouring until that has happened. And then we'll go home.
Matthew 18 tells us and guides us, instructs us on how to deal with controversy with a brother in the church. Even a pastor in a church who may be causing pain or suffering or doing things that are not judged to be wrong, but known to be wrong because of the word.
Yes.
Is Matthew 18 the only part of the Bible that gives us such instruction on how to deal with that onerous situation?
I think the Bible is replete with examples of how to deal with crises within the church. Throughout the Old Testament, we have many, many cases. And I always like what Moses said. Blot me from the book of life, yet let them live. That's a very Christ-like spirit. Mm-hmm. And it's not one that comes naturally. And the Bible says he was the most humblest of men. And it's an example to emulate. I mean, in my own life, I've had many occasions to really feel affronted and to feel justified in having righteous indignation. But I've learned that over time, the only way to do it is let the truth do the cutting. And I've asked the Lord to take animosity out of my system. Mm-hmm. And it's a battle, but then Christianity is a battle and a march. Mm-hmm. And what surprises me at the moment, in spite of what I see, I can focus on the thorns, and in spite of what I see in the church, all the negatives and all the thorny issues, I feel that there is an awareness of the times we are living in, and I see people beginning to wake up and look up, and there is a new wind that is beginning to blow in the church, and it's encouraging. Mm-hmm. So it depends where we put our focus.
You talked earlier about and reinforced the need to focus on Jesus first.
Yes.
And that's a growing experience, and you acquire that with God's blessings over time. But as the bumper sticker said, be patient with me because God's not finished yet. None of us are perfect. We all fall short.
He won't be finished until he comes.
Exactly. And so recognizing that all of us are flawed, in that flawed condition, that certainly can't be used as justification not to focus on issues that are causing disruption or destruction within the church, or for that matter, destruction or erosion of your own personal spiritual experience? Is it?
It's such a difficult issue. What do you do, for example, if an entire church changes direction and opens the doors to a totally new religious experience, totally contrary to everything that you stand for? And it's happening. And it has happened all over the world. One day you have a normal, good old-fashioned reverent worship system, and the next day you have a celebration church or coffee shop church or whatever. Not that there's something wrong with having a conversational church, but isn't church about worship? And if you want to have a conversation, why not have that at home? Why bring the conversation atmosphere into the church? That's how people will feel. And if you feel suddenly that your entire worship experience has been eroded away, then what do? Then the only thing you can do is go and find a place where you feel happy or welcome. But that is the extreme. What we have more often is a sort of quarter-way, halfway compromise situation, and everybody is really unhappy in the church. But there's a fascinating statement in the Spirit of Prophecy which says, God allows apostasy within the church to sift the members. Now, do we want to be sifted out, or do we want to remain in after the sifting process? That is the question we have to ask ourselves. So I've been in many, many situations where the worship style, for example, is contrary to every fiber of my being. Then I just do my own thing in the church. I sit there and I read my Bible. And it might be a little bit offensive even to some that I'm sitting and reading my Bible, but there's nothing else to do, right? So yes, it's a tricky situation, and how do we deal with it? We must be clever as serpents and gentle as doves.
However hard that may be for some of us.
It's very hard, very hard, yes. Especially if you have a German temperament, such as I have. Yeah.
I think it speaks to the issue of betrayal in my personal experience.
What is that personal experience?
I haven't been inside a sanctuary service of the Adventist Church for 2 years, by choice.
That's very sad.
It's very sad. But the alternative would have been sadder, because I went through a 3-year-plus experience of dealing with the kinds of leaders we've been discussing, to the point where an errant pastor was actually transferred from the church as a result of the building pressures and the work that the church board was doing, but was ushered out of the church in a hails of glory and adoration. And there was an unwillingness to acknowledge the truth that this person was dishonest, was breaking the commandments, and was teaching error, and a whole litany of issues. Yeah. In the process of dealing with that as a church member, it became apparent to me that the church was being divided down the middle, with those that saw the truth and those that chose not to or did not see the truth about this man's character or lack thereof.
Yes.
And I realized something my father had taught me many years ago, probably 50 years ago now, that it takes a man to be in a fight, but it takes a bigger man to walk away. And I decided that rather than being the instrument of a division in the church and be the stumbling block for the spiritual walk of others, that I had to remove myself, my temperament, my character from that turmoil because I'm a fixer. And that's my propensity. Some would call it a curse.
Fix things.
To fix things that are wrong, that are clearly wrong. Not based on my judgment, but based upon what the Bible says and what the Spirit of prophecy says.
Now, what about things that can only be fixed by the great architect?
Well, ultimately, he's the only fixer. But I truly believed, and to this day believe, from what I've read in the Bible and the Spirit of prophecy, that we have to be watchmen at the gate, not in some self-proclaimed sense of righteousness. Heaven forbid. Yeah. We have nothing to feel righteous about.
We have to be.
But we have to be present in a manner that as agents of God can help protect His church.
But why would you permit an incident such as that, where the other party, as you say, was removed because the party was clearly in transgression of what was right and what was justice? Why would you permit an incident like that to remove you?
Good question. First of all, it wasn't one incident. Secondly, it was the manner in which the president of the conference at the time and his executive mismanaged the process by ignoring the truth, ignoring the evidence, and putting a cloak of secrecy, this cone of silence over everything to protect the image of the church and to protect the reputation of the errant pastor, because heaven forbid that either of those should be tarnished. It's okay if the congregation and members of the church are struggling spiritually and falling by the wayside, as long as the reputation of the church and of the pastor aren't compromised. To me, that was the epitome of hypocrisy. And every fiber of my being screamed out against that. But I resisted that at that ultimate point and removed myself because, to your question, I didn't want to be a stumbling block to those in the church that were left behind. Even though the errant pastor had gone, you still had to deal with the executive at the conference level, and you still had this divisive factions within the church. And because of the proactive role I played as a member of the board to expose and address these issues and problems, I was seen to be the devil incarnate. Now, I could care less what other people think about me, providing my walk with God is secure. But I began to also feel that the hypocrisy was more than within the church leaders. It was within the congregation itself.
Doesn't God say He sets up kings and He removes them? And God permits situations to arise which clearly point out hypocrisies that exist, so that even the most dull-minded will be able to see that there is a choice to be made. And as my good friend Francois always says, we can choose between the two B's. We can become better or we can become better. And should we allow a conference president, a pastor, a union president, a division president, or just a simple member of the church to rob us of the experience of being part of the family of God? I would say no. I would say, in spite of what happened, no, even because of what has happened, I will not let myself be robbed of my affiliation and my membership in the family of God. Because we have wayward brothers and wayward sisters, do I distantiate myself or deny my affiliation to my earthly family? Then the same should apply to the heavenly family.
But the affiliation should be with Christ first, not with
Always
the church
with
and the
Christ
church
first.
members.
I don't go to church because of the members very often. I often go to church in spite of them.
Yeah.
And, you know, if you feel that what you have done is out of the right reasons, is noble, and you felt that you wanted to help the church to cleanse itself, to be the bride that it could be, then you have nothing to be ashamed of.
I agree with you, and I am not ashamed of anything that I did, because I did it with prayerful guidance and the best of my ability, consistent with the spirit of prophecy and the Bible. But to your point about the experience of the church, it's one of the reasons I was interested in probing with you the Seventh-day Adventist Church and the Remnant Church, and how do we truly know? Because my faith in the institution of the Seventh-day Adventist Church has been seriously rocked and compromised, to the point I elected to remove myself for 2 years.
Yeah.
I'm still a member, but to be honest, there have been a number of times where I've seriously considered severing my membership with the church because of that experience. To the point of the experience, I don't go to church, never went to church to be happy. We know about the crucible and the suffering that we all, and the crosses we all have to bear. That's fine, that's understood. But surely in the church experience, if you're in the right place, with the right frame of mind and frame of heart, even if you're unhappy, you should be experiencing joy. And because of the betrayal of my church pastor at the time, elders, the church leaders up to the conference president, betrayal by family members related to family issues, that whole series of betrayal led me to a place where I didn't have joy in my heart. And I, on a point of hypocrisy, I did not want to sit in a pew and play church with a beautiful smile on my face that was lying about what was inside, which was this whole cold lump without joy. A lack of connection to Jesus. And that's my issue and my problem between Jesus and I. But I could not use the Seventh-day Adventist Church environment or institution, particularly with the divisive factions as a result of the pastoral removal. That was the wrong environment, because every person I would see would either remind me of the betrayal by my spouse, the betrayal by my church leaders, the betrayal by whoever. So remove yourself from the betrayal and try to find a new connection to God that's not hinging upon the Seventh-day Adventist Church institution. That's where my mind took me. Yes. I know what the Proverbs say about leaning on your own understanding, but I could see, and through prayer could see no other solution. So I guess it leads to the question, what do you do in that circumstance? Play the hypocrite and play church with a smile on your face when you're empty inside?
Okay. Let's look at that. I can relate to what you are saying. I understand your reasons. But spiritually speaking, I believe they're still flawed. Samuel was placed in the most unfavorable circumstances. He grew up with a high priest who was anything but a good example. And the officiating priests were corrupt beyond measure. And they were removed. God said, I will remove them. And they were removed. And Samuel grew in stature with God in spite of the circumstances. The other example I also use is Moses. He was raised in the courts of Egypt. Amidst all the apostasy that was there, and his own people weren't exactly shining lights and doing what was right at that stage either. And yet, God took him eventually through the wilderness experience, and he learned what it was to walk with God. And we can remove ourselves from the unfavorable circumstances, and that's what will lead to a monastic system. I'll do my own thing, I'll sit in my monastery, I'll worship God, and I'll have peace with all men. And God didn't give us a monastic system. God gave us the church. Bless his heart, he gave us the church. What a lesson book. What a character building experience. The same pastor who told me choose between the two bees, I had a guy screaming at him and carrying on, not because of what he'd done wrong, but because of what he'd done right. And he just looked at him and he shook his head. And you know, you just meet people like that sometimes on this planet. And I looked at this and I was filled with righteous indignation. This man needed serious reprimand, and I was just the man to do it. And I said to this pastor, how dare you let him speak to you like that? He said, no, leave it. That man builds character.
And we can never have enough of that.
We can never have enough of that. So my suggestion is, take the hurt, leave it at the foot of the cross, go to the church, and instead of looking at the hypocrisy, look who can benefit by your presence, who can you help, who can you uplift, and work from there. And then watch in the providence of God how he will change circumstances. If we all decided to withdraw, what would remain in the church in the end? There would be nothing left. If you are a man who feels you want to stand for what is right, you do not want to have hypocrisy in the church, you want to have standards that should be emulated or that people couldn't look up to, and everybody of like mind were to withdraw from the church because they cannot find it in there, well, then you'll find it even less. My advice is go back. Get the glue.
Go back, get the glue.
Yes. It's hard, I know. But remember another little definition. That is, justification is laying man's glory in the dust.
I think wise words, Dr. Veith, and I appreciate you sharing those. It's certainly a struggle, and we all have our crosses to bear, as I said it earlier, but the inherent contradictions in how we're told we should respect our church leaders when they're not worthy of respect. Those types of things are major stumbling blocks, certainly for me. I can't respect the pastor that lies outright.
Paul said, "You whitewashed wall." And someone walked up to him and said, "How dare you speak to the high priest like that?" And Paul says, "I apologize. I did not know that it was the high priest, for it is written, thou shalt not speak evil of the leaders of thy people." But by definition, he was a leader of the people and he was a whitewashed wall. I mean, Paul summed it up beautifully. And yet, had he known, he wouldn't have said it. What do you do now?
I think that my experience in the church is not unique. The circumstances may have been, but there are a lot of Adventists that are suffering.
I've just been in one of the poorest countries of the world and spoken to 7,000 people who have been alienated from the church. Bitter, sad, hurt, because they feel that it was done because of them preaching what the Adventist Church stands for. And, you always have to have two sides of a story, of course, and I didn't get two sides of the story in its fullness, but some of the elders of the official churches came to me and said to me, how do we get this message into the official church because we don't have it anymore? Now, that's quite eye-opening when you speak to thousands and they're all in that situation. You are a member here, and there's a member there, and there's a member there. I would make an appeal, if I can use this forum of a discussion between you and me, and we didn't plan anything before. This is purely spontaneous. I would make an appeal to the leadership of the Seventh-day Adventist Church to ask itself the question, can we live with the alienation that has taken place within our ranks? Is there anything that we can do to welcome those back who really love the truth and want to stand for it? And I would like to make an appeal on those who have been disenfranchised and have been removed to lay anything that is not absolutely in line with the issues of salvation to one side, pet theories, or whatever it is, lifestyle. These are things which God works with individually. Lay them aside, and let's see how close we can get. And there will be always issues which divide absolutely, because they're issues of clear-cut rights and wrongs, where there is no compromise that is possible. I'm not talking about a compromise. I don't believe in a compromise with error, but I do believe, and I've started to believe, in a compromise in terms of shutting your mouth on issues that are not absolutely essential for salvation. And see if we can fix this church from inside.
Well, I would hope and pray that the leaders of the church and those that have been disenfranchised would hear the appeal and would respond to it favorably.
That would be nice, wouldn't it?
Unfortunately, in terms of my experience, and I hope I'm wrong, but I don't have a lot of faith that the leaders of the church will respond. I look at books like Samuel Corintang Pippin's Must We Be Silent, and the issues that he explores with such incredible insight. And his final admonitions are similar to yours. Stay to the church, respect your leaders, follow the Bible, grow your connection with God. Those truisms are well known by many of us.
Yes.
But one read of one chapter of that book alone gives you a tip of the iceberg of the fundamental issues within the leadership of our church.
I've sat in the committees. And I've sat in high-ranking committees, I mean at the highest level. And I know what is said. But let me give you an encouragement. I've sat in committees where pastors would break out in tears, literally, as a consequence of some of the blatant apostasies that were put forward as commendable. And looking at the groupings that took place and the numbers, I would say that those who believe it is written just as it is written were vastly outnumbered. And yet when it came to a vote, God's truth stood. It's like your mouth starts hanging open and you say, how exactly did that happen? And the only conclusion I can come to is God is still in control of this church. And He's the captain of the helm, and He will see this ship through. And there will be a terrible shudder and a terrible shaking. But God forbid that we throw the Manasseh overboard before he converts.
So, no question, God's at the helm and we have every faith. But we're in the bilges, sloshing
We're in
around
the
with the
bulges,
garbage.
but remember, it's better inside the ark where it stinks than outside
Mm-hmm.
where you drown. I had that situation in Europe with the Reformed Adventists. They told me the ark stinks, and I said, yes, but the solution is not the swimming lesson. The solution is a clothes peg.
Yeah.
Because it's going to remain there.
In our last discussion, in our first interview series, we talked about many topics, but I'm reminded of it because I think there's a connection between these topics. The church is not perfect. Its members and leaders are not perfect. That's a given. None of us are perfect.
No.
But one of the things that drew me to the church late in my life, 10 years ago, as a scientist and a believer in evolution, as you were,
Yes.
was this refreshing willingness and ability to examine the truth of the Word and to abide by the Word out of love of God. The obedience born from love.
Yes.
And the willingness to study and explore the spirit of prophecy and the Bible line by line, verse by verse, and the incredible truths that it unveiled. A wondrous intellectual experience for me, and that was how God drew me to the church.
Yes.
However, in my experience over the last 5 years, on the issue of adultery and divorce, where I was the victim, I had a pastor in one of the churches in the Lower Mainland that actually said that the errant parties should be rebaptized and remarried, even though the manual of the church, the Bible, and the spirit of prophecy, and all of the guidance and direction says that in an unrepentant situation where adultery continues, that is not what God teaches. That is not what should be done. And so trying to reconcile that statement by a pastor with my current situation, and believe me, because of that betrayal in the family, I studied it intensely. I approached the pastor and asked him to explain and help me understand what I was missing, because that's not what I read in these authorities. And without going into the detail, the responses were less than satisfying because A, they were not consistent with what the Bible said, and they were more situational ethics to create an opportunity to get wayward members of the church back into the church, even though they may not be repenting, they may still be committing adultery. That led me to arrange for a session with conference leaders and this pastor so that we could discuss it. And I came with the Bible and Spirit of Prophecy writings and Samuel Bakioki writings on this, and all of this authority highlighted, marked, page numbered, to put before them to have a shared discussion, because there was such a focus on Bruce's interpretation being wrong and their interpretation being right. I thought, I must be missing something.
You must be missing something.
After 4 hours of discussion, without a willingness to open the first book or look at any of the sections of the manual, Ellen G. White teachings, Bible teachings, any of those authorities. It was all about how do we mediate this conflict so that Bruce's irritation goes away. And my response to them was, I'm not irritated, I'm perplexed, I'm saddened, I'm confused. If I've got it wrong, please show me where, because my understanding of the Bible is different from what you're teaching. Refused to open the books, went away. One of the conference leaders took me aside in the parking lot and said, Bruce, you're absolutely right in your understanding of those authorities with respect to adultery and divorce. And I leaned a little closer to hear what else he had to say, because I knew there was a but coming. And the but was, but Bruce, this is a young pastor, and he's doing well. And he may have learned something from this exchange, but we don't want his error to be fully exposed. What kind of an organization and institution is that, where leaders are preaching and teaching the stifling of truth and compromising the spiritual walk of a troubled brother to support pastors? Betrayal of the worst kind.
The spirit of prophecy says that if you embrace error, eventually you begin to see it in the same light as everyone else who embraces error. Now, I've only been an Adventist for just under 25 years myself. And I must say, in the 25 years that I've been around, I've seen a tremendous decline in standards. But the spirit of prophecy stated that standards were declining in her time and would decline further as we go along. As it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be at the coming of the Son of Man. Standards at every level, in terms of sexuality, sexual preferences, marriage and divorce. Name any one of those issues. Have we not become more and more tolerant because the world has become more and more tolerant? In fact, the world hasn't only become more tolerant, it's leaning over to the other side where it would prefer to legislate the non-tolerant position or the tolerant position, to the detriment of those who are actually in the right. So those who are in the right are the ones who become criminalized, and those who are in the wrong have the legislative halls in their support. Isn't that the world we live in? And a church that gives up standards ends up on that slippery road. That's why people get up and they write books like Must We Be Silent? And that is the spirit of the world that is leavening the churches. Now, it's true, I've sat on divorce committees, marriage and divorce committees, and some of the issues that you deal with there on a daily basis are very complex. And where do you draw the line as to what is right? And some of them are absolutely crystal clear. Like, I assume your case, from what I've gleaned, is pretty crystal clear. And if it is crystal clear, you would hope to have, the right stand. But this spirit of compromise is everywhere in the world. And it's also in the church. And it's one of the signs of the fast coming, of the events of the end. Because that was the same spirit that leavened ancient Israel just before the destruction of Jerusalem. So yes, if I can apologize on behalf of my church, no, but seriously, because we have the spirit of tolerance and not calling sin by its right name, and not having sin appear exceedingly sinful. Now, there's a very fine line in terms of how you deal with the issues of sin. Here was the woman, she was caught in adultery in the very act. And yet Jesus said, neither do I condemn you. But because he saw a heart, he saw a repentant heart. And he placed her under grace and he sent her back to the law. Go and sin no more. So our attitude must be the attitude of Christ. But sin is exceedingly sinful. And if you cling to sin, then you have no option but to be destroyed with it, because our God is a consuming fire, and he will destroy sin. So if you cling to it, you will be destroyed with it. I always marvel at how the world says, when you are bad, you go to the hot place, and when you are good, you go to the cool place. No, it's the other way around. Satan was walking amidst the fiery stones. I saw, as it were, a sea of glass mingled with fire. The three worthies, friends of Daniel, they were thrown into the fiery furnace, but there was no hurt on them. They were in the fire. The good guys were in the fire, but the fire did nothing to them because they were covered by the righteousness of Christ. So we will one day stand in the fire, and your consolation, if it is a consolation, is that those who do not make sin exceedingly sinful and choose to remain attached to it will have to be consumed with it one day.
In terms of the personal experience, it's no consolation to me at all. In terms of the end-time theology and truths, of course it's a consolation, because ultimately sin will be eradicated
It'll be
forever.
eradicated.
But there's the struggle, because we are individuals on this earth, in this war zone,
Yes.
and things affect us.
Yes.
And it's if you're not clinging closely enough to Jesus, then you'll become the collateral damage. And I recognize I'm collateral damage right now. Not dead, but mortally wounded, or so I felt or
But
feel.
choose not to be bitter. Make it a conscious choice. I choose not to be bitter, and I choose to take my package of hurt and put it at the foot of the cross.
Agreed. I couldn't agree more. But this isn't about feeling. This isn't about bitterness. I mean, this experience I'm talking about has been
about
happening for
justice.
5 years.
Is it about justice?
And it's not about justice. Nope.
And what
Not
is
about
it
justice. It's not about emotion. It's the purely intellectual understanding that this organization that I attached myself to at great cost, but fine, die to self and pursue these truths, all of a sudden seemed to be a bit of a house of cards.
So it let you down.
Yeah, more than let me down, betrayed me. The leaders betrayed me. The members betrayed me. And that betrayal...
You're in good company.
I guess I am. I guess
You're
I
in
am.
good company.
Yeah, I'm
The
not alone in that
disciples
regard. You're right.
All left Christ.
Yeah.
He was betrayed by his own people. He was crucified. And Ellen White says, we will have to draw warmth from the coldness of others, courage from their cowardice, and faithfulness from their treason.
Mm-hmm.
A powerful statement. Mm-hmm. And if we can learn to do that, then we have learned a lesson in Christ.
Good point. I think your comment about taking the betrayal or the anger or the hurt, surely there's emotion involved. We're all human beings.
Yes, sure, there's emotion.
But you cannot choose to not have an emotional response. You have to acknowledge the emotion you have.
You can.
And choose what to do with it.
That's right, but you have the freedom of choice.
On what to do with the emotion, not
Yes.
whether you experience the emotion.
No, you cannot negate the experience,
Right,
but you can make a choice as to how you're going to deal with it.
And so coming full circle to the choice that I made, recognizing the influence I was having on those around me in the church, the detrimental effect it was having on my spiritual walk and my heart, although every fiber of my being said, Bruce, get back into that fight and correct this error, because these leaders are leading the flock astray and they are hurting you and others, I chose to walk away. Because my presence was more of a disruption, more a liability than an asset.
Yeah. What you were seeing is that this was not going to change them. No matter what stand you took, they had made their decision. So you did what you felt you had to do. You said what you felt you had to say. You did not get the response you wished that you should receive. And they, in your opinion or in reality, did not move one iota from their position of error. Mm-hmm. That's the fact of the matter, and you cannot change it, but you did what you could, and you leave the consequences to God. To go and try and force the change in their attitude is a waste of time.
Yeah, no, I realized that years ago. You're right.
So scratch it out of your book, turn a new page, and say, I'll leave that to God.
Agreed. And I'm there. But there's still the matter of the Adventist Church and the institution with all of the apostasy, hypocrisy, and intellectual dishonesty.
But if it's not there, you're in the wrong church, brother. I say to people, look for a church that's pathetic, that's lukewarm, that doesn't seem to have righteousness. It needs eye salve, it's spiritually blind. And if you found it, then join it.
So take solace in the fact that these trials and tribulations prevail because it's fulfillment of prophecy and Christ is coming soon.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. There's no other way you could deal with it. If you tried to change it, you'd go insane because you'd be barking against prophecy. And prophecy stands like a rock. You cannot move it. You cannot change it. But God will change it. And He will have a church triumphant.
I was told in this experience by some church leaders that, and was asked the question, Bruce, where is your love? Where is your forgiveness? To which I replied, because it was a rhetorical question to me, to which I replied, only God knows my heart.
Yes.
Don't you presume to judge it. But you cannot smother, stifle, hide, secret away these terrible goings-on within the church and the congregation out of some self-proclaimed, self-righteous message of love, and that to do otherwise is not being loving like Christ was.
You may not reduce love to a sickly sentimentalism. Love is a principle.
Yes.
It's not a gloss over.
Yeah.
You're right.
Yeah. But they used it that way in their criticism to try to argue, do not address these issues. Step back. Stop rocking the boat. Even though we're all in the bilge, if you're on the starboard side or the port side, the boat may still rock.
Yes.
So that message of love is very important because you're right, love is a principle and it's a choice, and it's not sentimental love. It's Christ-like love.
Yes.
Not always easy to achieve. Yeah.
The spirit of forgiveness is another one that is very difficult under certain trying circumstances. But Christ said, I have forgiven you. And if I had to make a list of all my transgressions in my entire life, well, it would be
a
substantive.
long list.
And there's an accuser standing by the side who is an expert at revealing all the finer nuances and details of every single one of those. And yet, I say to Christ, thank you that you have forgiven them. And Jesus says to me, now forgive your brother. There is that aspect of forgiveness, but forgiveness must never be confused with condoning sin.
Forgive the sinner, but don't forgive the sin.
No, you cannot forgive sin. Sin is exceedingly sinful.
Yeah.
But you can forgive the sinner.
Yeah. Very good. Weighty topics, Dr.
Weighty
Veith.
topics, yes,
Weighty
and it's
topics.
complicated. And the way I'm talking to you now is a way that only develops in the fire of affliction. And there was a point in my life when I was also exceedingly bitter. And I had to make a conscious choice. And I couldn't make it. So I had to say to God, take it away. I don't want to live with it anymore. And He took it away. And somehow since then, I have more compassion on even the most apostate erring individual, whether he be high up in the church or low. But I still have an abhorrence of error.
Delicate balance to sustain.
What conclusion do we come to at the end of our meeting?
Well, one conclusion I've come to is I look forward to the next opportunity to have a conversation with you, because it's always a pleasure and I always learn something. So thank you for that.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
And may God bless you, and give it another try. Give it another try. Let's go. Let's see whether with God's help, all those, not just you, everyone who has been hurt, who has been trampled, who has been alienated, or physically thrown out, whether we can come back and give it another bash.
Amen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Pleasure.
God bless.